They said the desert never forgets a name, but I reckon that's not true. The desert doesn't care about names at all. It only remembers the weight of footsteps, the smell of gunpowder, and the sound a lonely soul makes when it finally breaks. That winter, the wind carried something different through Dry Creek. Not a gunfight, not a storm. It was a woman. Loretta Caldwell arrived with a small trunk, a threadbare shawl, and a kind of hope the West usually chews up and spits out. She wasn't the kind of woman men in that town looked at twice. Too round, too soft, too quiet. Folks whispered before she even opened her mouth. They called her names behind her back, the kind of words that stick like burrs to a saddle blanket. Dry Creek was a place for hard men and harder women. The saloon girls wore their loneliness like perfume, and the miners drank themselves hollow by sundown. The kind-hearted didn't last long there. But Loretta wasn't soft in spirit, no matter what her shape said to the eye. I watched her step off that wagon with her chin high, eyes steady, like she'd been through worse storms than gossip. She came looking for work, knocking on doors, offering to cook or clean. Most doors closed fast. Others didn't open at all. When she reached the saloon, Odessa Finch, queen of the town's cruelty, leaned against the counter with a smirk sharp enough to draw blood. "You'll scare off the customers, sweetheart," she said, voice sweet like spoiled honey. Loretta thanked her anyway and walked out. The wind picked up dust and shame alike. I remember the way she squared her shoulders as if to say, "You can laugh, but you won't stop me." Out here, that's the only armor worth wearing. That same day, out by the edge of town, a man named White Stone McCrae was fixing a broken gate. Folks called him Stone, not just because of his name, but because he looked carved out of rock. Tall as a pine, arms like the beams of his barn, eyes the color of storm clouds. He was a widower, and grief had made a home in his silence. People said he spoke to his cattle more than to men, maybe because cattle didn't lie. Loretta passed by that gate, dust on her hem and courage left in her voice. "You look like you could use a hand," she said. He didn't answer at first, just watched her from under the brim of his hat. Then slow and rough, like words dragged over gravel, he said, "Can you cook?" She nodded. "Better than I'd talk." He looked back at the half-fixed gate, then at her hands, strong hands, scarred from kitchen knives and hot pans. "Come Monday," he said, "if you mean it." That's how it began. No handshake, no smile, just a promise in the dust. On Monday morning, she walked into Stone's ranch house. The place smelled of cold ashes and loneliness, dishes piled like forgotten memories, a stove that hadn't burned in months. The air felt heavy, as if grief itself had settled on the rafters. Loretta set down her bundle and rolled up her sleeves. She didn't ask what to do first. She just started doing. Wiped the counters, lit the stove, swept the floor. When the first crackle of fire came to life, it was like the house exhaled for the first time in years. Stone watched from the doorway. He didn't say a word. Didn't have to. Out here, silence is a language all its own. By nightfall, the smell of stew filled the cabin. Real food, not canned beans or salted jerky. She set a bowl on the table for him, another for herself, then sat quietly. They ate without talk, the way strangers sometimes do when words would only make things fragile. Outside, the coyotes started their song. Inside, a different quiet settled, one that wasn't empty, just waiting. In the days that followed, the rhythm of that cabin changed. Mornings began with the sound of her mixing dough and the creak of his boots on the porch. Evenings ended with a lamplight glowing against the wood, shadows dancing slow on the walls. Stone started fixing things around the house he'd ignored for years, the hinge on the pantry, the loose board near the stove, and each time he did, Loretta thanked him like it mattered. Maybe it did. I reckon Stone didn't know what to do with kindness anymore. He'd buried his share of it, but kindness has a way of coming back when you least expect it. One morning, the snow fell soft across the plains. Loretta stood by the window, watching the white drift over the fences, and for a moment she smiled. Not because the world had changed, but because she'd found a place inside it where she didn't feel small. I remember thinking then, maybe this was how healing looked on the frontier. Not grand, not loud. Just two souls who'd stopped running long enough to share a meal and a little quiet. But the West has a way of testing what it gives. And before long, both of them would learn what it meant to stand against the wind. The weeks passed slow, the way winter always does in the high plains. Out there, every sunrise felt like a question. Would the cold let you work today? Or would it pin you down and watch you shiver? But inside that cabin, warmth had started to creep back into the corners. It wasn't the fire, it was her. Loretta filled the place with quiet motion, the scrape of a wooden spoon against a pot, the soft hum of an old hymn, the sound of her breath as she worked the dough. Stone never asked her to do more than cook, but somehow she did. She tended to the chickens, patched the curtains, stacked wood by the door before dawn. He'd come in from the fields and find the lamp already lit, supper ready, and that faint smell of sage and bread that no man forgets once he's had it. The men who worked the outer ranch started talking. They said Stone's house didn't look so dead anymore. They joked that maybe he'd brought in a maid. Some said a wife. The story spread faster than the wind. Out here gossip's the one thing that never freezes. Odessa Finch heard it too. That woman ran the saloon like a queen with a cracked crown, sharp, bitter, and always thirsty for a show. She had a history with Stone, though nobody could say if it was love or something meaner. When she heard about Loretta living at his ranch, her smile turned colder than the whiskey she poured. One evening, Stone rode into town for supplies. The moment he stepped through the mercantile door, Odessa was waiting, leaning against the counter like she'd been expecting him all week. "So," she said, "you've gone and found yourself a cook." Stone said nothing, just placed a list on the counter. Flour, coffee, nails, lamp oil. Odessa traced a finger over the wood. Funny how men get lonely this time of year. He looked at her then, slow and level. "You selling supplies or questions today?" Her smile faltered, but only a little. "You don't have to be cruel, Stone. Folks just like to talk is all. They always did." He gathered his goods, tipped his hat, and walked out. The bell above the door gave one soft ring, like a sigh. That night, when he returned to the ranch, Loretta was sitting by the stove, mending one of his shirts. The firelight flickered against her face, soft and steady. He set the sack of supplies on the table, dust still clinging to his coat. "You been into town?" she said without looking up. He grunted, a small yes. "Didn't like it much?" "Never do." She nodded. "That's what I figured." The air hung quiet for a long while. Then she said, "You want coffee?" He nodded again, and she poured it, dark and strong. When he took the cup, their fingers brushed. Just a second, nothing more. But out there in that silence, it felt like thunder. The next morning, Stone brought in a box from the wagon. Heavy iron, black with soot. "Found it in town," he said. "Thought you could use it." She opened the lid and stared. Inside was a Dutch oven, thick cast iron, deep enough to feed an army. Loretta blinked, her hands trembling just a little. "That's too fine a thing for me." He shrugged. "A good cook deserves a good tool." Then he walked back out into the wind. After that, something shifted between them. Small things at first. She left an extra biscuit on his plate. He fixed the squeak in her rocking chair. Words stayed scarce, but the silence changed shape. It wasn't empty anymore. Then came the storm. It rolled in from the west without warning. The kind of storm that makes the land hold its breath. By noon, the sky had turned the color of iron, and the wind screamed through the cottonwoods. The ranch hands were out driving cattle, but the herd spooked when the thunder hit. You could hear their cries from miles off. Hundreds of hooves pounding, a sound like the earth breaking apart. Stone grabbed his coat, ready to ride. Loretta caught his arm. "You'll be killed in that mess," she said. "I've got to try." Before he could mount up, the wind tore a lantern from its hook. The barn roof shuddered, and lightning split the sky. The cattle were coming fast. Too fast. Straight for the fences, straight for the house. I was there that night, watching from the ridge. What she did next, I'll never forget. Loretta ran into the storm. Her hair came loose, her dress whipping around her legs. She took 2 lanterns from the porch and held them high, their light barely cutting through the dust. Then she started banging on a metal pot, loud as she could, shouting, waving the lights like beacons. The herd veered, confused by the noise and glow. The front line broke first, turning just enough to miss the corral. One by one, the cattle followed, swerving wide, the stampede spilling harmlessly into the open plain. And when it was done, she fell to her knees, coughing, shaking, lantern still burning in her hands. Stone rode up and dropped beside her. He said her name once, soft, as if afraid it might break. "I'm fine," she whispered. "They're safe." The wind carried the smell of rain and smoke. In that moment, it wasn't a rancher and a cook kneeling in the dirt. It was 2 souls who'd finally stopped pretending they didn't need each other. I reckon the West saw plenty of brave men, but that night it bowed its head for a woman with flour on her hands and fire in her heart. By dawn, the storm had passed. The land lay still under a blanket of mist, and the ranch looked like something half reborn. The fences were bent but standing, the herd scattered but alive. Smoke rose from the chimney, steady as a heartbeat. Inside that cabin, Loretta moved slow, her hands still raw from the lantern handles. She stirred a pot of coffee and listened to the quiet hum of the stove, as if the fire itself was trying to thank her. Stone sat at the table, his arm bandaged from a stray splinter, his face unreadable. He hadn't said much since the night before. Men like him didn't know how to put gratitude into words. Out here saying thank you felt smaller than it should. So he said nothing at all. Loretta poured his coffee and turned to the window. "They're calm now," she said softly. "The herd," he nodded, "because of you." She smiled faintly, still looking outside. "Because of a little noise and light." Stone studied her then. The morning sun caught her hair, glinting like copper in the dust. She was no longer the woman who had walked into town weeks ago, nervous and unseen. She stood with the steadiness of someone who had faced the wind and didn't flinch. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About what?" "About what this place needed." She looked at him surprised. "And what's that?" He leaned back, eyes on the fire. "A heart." For a moment, no one spoke. The room held its breath between them. Then Loretta turned back to her dough, pressing her palms into the flour, the way she always did when words felt too heavy. By afternoon, the ranch hands rode in, wet and worn from chasing strays all night. When they saw the fences still standing, their cheers cut through the cold. They found out what had happened soon enough. By sundown, everyone in Dry Creek knew the story of the woman who turned their herd with 2 lanterns. Odessa heard it too. The tale made its way into her saloon, like smoke through a crack. She poured whiskey for a group of cowhands, listening as they spoke of Stone's woman with awe in their voices. That phrase hit her like a slap. "She's no one's woman," Odessa snapped. The room went quiet for a beat before the piano started again. Slow and uneasy, but gossip doesn't stop once it starts. The next morning, half the town was whispering that Stone McCrae had found himself a savior, that maybe he'd even marry her come spring. Loretta didn't hear the talk, not yet. She spent her days as she always did, kneading, stirring, mending, tending. The rhythm of the ranch had found its pulse again, yet under it all, a shadow started to grow. One evening, as Stone returned from the south pasture, he found a wagon parked at his gate. Odessa stood beside it, wrapped in a fur shawl, her expression carved from ice. "Evening," she said, her voice too sweet to be kind. He dismounted slowly. "What brings you here, Odessa?" She tilted her head. "Thought I'd pay a visit. Folks say you've gone and buried yourself with a cook. Figured I'd see what kind of spell she's put on you." Stone's jaw tightened. "You should go." Odessa stepped closer. "You always did like strays, didn't you? Thought you could fix them. This one's no different." Before he could answer, the door opened behind him. Loretta stood in the doorway, apron dusted white, her eyes calm but firm. "Miss Finch," she said evenly, "you came a long way to make trouble." Odessa gave a thin smile. "I came to see what's keeping the mighty Stone McCrae chained to his porch." Loretta stepped down into the yard, the wind tugging at her shawl. "He's not chained. He's home." The 2 women faced each other, the air between them charged like the moment before lightning. Then Odessa's smile broke, sharp and brittle. "Enjoy it while it lasts." She turned, climbed into her wagon, and cracked the reins. The sound faded into the distance, leaving only dust and silence. Stone turned toward Loretta. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." He nodded once, and that was the end of it. Or so he thought. The next few days felt lighter, though neither of them spoke much about what had happened. Loretta baked bread that filled the house with warmth. Stone repaired the porch rail, humming low under his breath. It might have been peace if peace could last in Dry Creek, but trouble doesn't ride away easy. It circles back when the light's good and you've let your guard down. On the 4th evening, a small crowd appeared at the ranch gate. Town folks, miners, drovers, even the blacksmith's wife. At their front stood Odessa Finch, her face flushed with pride and spite. She called out, We heard there's a woman here who thinks she's better than the rest of us. A woman who tricks men into feeling sorry for her. Thought we'd see for ourselves." Loretta stood at the porch, hands folded, not flinching. Stone came out beside her, silent as thunder before the strike. Odessa's smile widened. "Well, ain't this sweet? The rancher and his saint." The crowd laughed low and mean. Then Stone stepped forward. "That's enough." His voice cut through the noise like a whip. "You all came to look? Fine. Look." He pointed to the barn, to the fences still standing, to the cattle safe in the pen. "She saved all that. While the rest of you were hiding from the storm, she was out there holding the line. You call that a trick? I call it courage." The laughter died. Odessa's eyes narrowed. "You defend her over your own." "I'm defending what's right," Stone said. No one spoke after that. The wind blew cold through the grass. One by one, the townsfolk drifted back toward the road, their shame heavy in the dirt behind them. Odessa was the last to leave, her voice small now, almost breaking. "You'll regret this, Stone." He didn't answer. He just reached for Loretta's hand. She let him take it. The door closed behind them, and the sound of the wind faded away. Later that night, the fire burned low. Loretta sat in the rocking chair, her eyes on the embers. "You shouldn't have to fight my battles," she said. Stone looked at her, weary but soft. "You didn't need me to. I just wanted to stand where you stood." I reckon no words could have said more than that. Out here, love doesn't come dressed in poetry. It comes in the quiet, after the storm, in the way two people look at each other when they finally stop pretending they're alone. And that night, Dry Creek went silent for the first time in a long while, because even the wind knew it was watching something worth remembering. After that night, something in the air around the ranch changed. The wind still carried dust and the scent of sage, but it also carried peace. The town of Dry Creek, so quick to sneer and whisper, found its voice quieter in the mornings. Men tipped their hats when they passed Stone on the trail. Women nodded at Loretta when she came to trade. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was the first kind of respect the West ever gives, a silence that isn't cruel. Loretta never mentioned what happened. She went back to her work like nothing had shifted. Bread in the oven, wood stacked by the door, the hum of her voice mixing with the sound of the fire. But Stone saw it, the way she stood taller, the way her eyes held steadier. He'd seen men survive gunfights and lose more courage than this woman had shown and kept. One evening, I rode up to the ranch myself. The sun was bleeding out behind the hills, and that soft amber light filled the valley. I remember hearing her laughter before I saw her. Not loud, just a small sound, the kind that drifts out from a house that's learning to breathe again. Stone was sitting on the porch, oiling his saddle, hat pushed back, face at ease. "Evening," he said when he saw me. "Evening," I answered. "Heard you've been through quite a spell." He didn't smile exactly, but there was something close to it. "She kept the herd alive," he said. "Ain't hard to beat that." Inside, Loretta called from the kitchen. "You staying for supper, Sheriff?" I glanced toward the door. "Only if there's enough to spare." "There's always enough," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. That's how the winter went. The storm faded into story, and the story turned into legend. Folks told it around campfires and at the saloon, the tale of the woman with 2 lanterns who turned a stampede. It spread the way all good Western stories do. Half truth, half miracle. But the truth was simpler. Loretta wasn't a miracle. She was a woman who'd been told her whole life she wasn't enough, and then proved the world wrong. When spring came, the land woke slow. Snow melted into rivers that ran like silver through the canyons. Calves were born, fences mended, and life rolled forward like it always does. Stone's ranch prospered more than it had in years. The men worked steady, the herd fattened, and every night the lights from that cabin glowed warm across the plains. Loretta's cooking became talk for miles around. They said she could make a man forget the taste of loneliness. I reckon that was true. One morning, Stone rode into town with her to sell butter and eggs. The townsfolk stared. Of course, they always do when something honest stands in front of them. Odessa was there, behind the bar, wiping glasses that didn't need cleaning. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when Loretta stepped in. "Well," Odessa said, "look who's found herself a place." Loretta didn't rise to it. "Just selling what I made," she said softly. Odessa leaned forward. "And what else did you make, Miss Caldwell? A man's heart, maybe?" Stone's voice came low, steady as thunder before rain. "She didn't make it. She fixed what was left of it." The saloon went quiet. The kind of quiet that lasts long enough to be remembered. After that day, nobody questioned her again. Weeks rolled by. The ranch bloomed with the green of early summer. The grass reached the horses' knees, and wildflowers bent low in the wind. Loretta began planting a small garden by the porch. Herbs, onions, and a patch of mint that filled the air when she brushed past. Stone built her a bench from cedar wood and set it near the fence line. She'd sit there at sunset, hands folded in her lap, watching the light fall across the fields. Sometimes Stone joined her, and they'd sit without talking, just listening to the land settle for the night. "I used to think quiet meant lonely," she said once. "Now it feels like peace." Stone nodded. "Maybe it's the same thing, just without the fear." That night, the stars came early. The horizon glowed faintly red, the way it does when tomorrow promises rain. Loretta rested her head against the porch post, eyes half closed. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore." "Why not?" He looked out toward the plains. "'Cause the world doesn't feel so empty now." She smiled at that, small and true. Out here love doesn't announce itself. It creeps in like dawn, slow, patient, turning the dark to gold before you even notice. And I reckon that's how it came for him. Not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with the sound of rain on the roof and the smell of bread in the morning. But peace never lasts long in the frontier. Oh, it's too wild, too untamed for stillness. And though neither of them knew it yet, the past has a way of finding even those who've earned their rest. Late one night, as the rain began to fall, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. Lightning flashed behind him, cutting his shape against the sky. He was headed for Stone's ranch, and by the time the thunder rolled, his shadow was already at the gate. I remember that night, clear as glass, because peace, when it comes to the West, never comes without a price. The rain had turned, the dirt road into a dark ribbon of mud. Hoofbeats echoed through the valley, slow, deliberate, heavy. Inside the cabin, Loretta stirred from sleep. The storm outside whispered against the windows, and for a moment she thought it was only the wind. But then she heard it again, the steady rhythm of a horse coming closer. Stone was already up. He stood at the window, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of the dying fire. "Someone's riding in," he said quietly. Loretta sat up, pulling her shawl tighter. "At this hour?" He didn't answer. "Out here you learn not to guess until you see." He reached for his coat, the one still stained from that winter storm, and the revolver hanging by the door. The latch clicked, a small sound that carried like thunder in the stillness. When the rider came into view, the lantern light caught the wet glint of his coat. He dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. Stone opened the door before he could knock. The man looked older than his years, his face carved by travel and regret. His hat dripped rain, his hands trembled from the cold. "Evening," he said, voice low. "You McCrae?" Stone nodded. "I've got word from the North Ranch. There's trouble." Loretta came to stand behind Stone, her eyes searching the stranger's face. "What kind of trouble?" Stone asked. The man hesitated. "Rustlers. They hit a Harper's spread last week, burned the barn, took 30 head. Word is they're moving south." Stone's jaw tightened. Rustlers in this part of the country didn't just steal cattle. They burned what they couldn't take, left fear behind like a trail of smoke. "I thought you ought to know," the man said. "They'll come this way soon enough." Stone gave a short nod. "Appreciate the warning." The rider tipped his hat. "You'd best keep a watch tonight." Then he turned, mounted up, and vanished into the curtain of rain. When the sound of hooves faded, Stone closed the door and leaned against it. The room felt smaller suddenly, the fire throwing restless shadows. "Will they come here?" Loretta asked. "Maybe." He holstered the gun. "If they do, we'll be ready." But she heard the weariness under his words, the kind that comes from too many years of waiting for the next fight. By dawn, the rain stopped, leaving the land slick and silent. Fog hung low over the plains, blurring the line between sky and earth. Stone rode out to check the fences, leaving Loretta with a rifle propped near the door. She kept busy the way she always did, baking, cleaning, pretending not to listen for sounds that didn't belong. The house smelled of fresh bread and damp pine. When she caught her reflection in the window, she saw a woman she barely recognized, hair coming loose, flour on her sleeves, eyes steady as stone. Midday brought the first sign. Hoof prints near the creek bed, too many to belong to one rider. By the time Stone returned, his face told her everything. "They're close," he said. "How many?" 4, maybe 5. That night, the lanterns burned low. The wind was still, too still. Out in the dark, even the crickets had gone quiet. Loretta sat near the window, rifle across her lap. Stone checked his revolver, every motion slow, certain. "You don't have to stay up," he said. She gave him a look. "You really think I sleep through this?" He almost smiled. "Didn't think you would." Hours passed. The fire crackled soft in the stove. Then hoofbeats, faint at first, then closer, circling the house. Stone blew out the lantern. "Stay behind me." The front door creaked open an inch under the weight of the wind. For a long heartbeat, and there was nothing, just rainwater dripping from the eaves. Then a voice called from outside. "Evening, McCrae. Heard you got yourself a fine herd." Stone stepped into the doorway. The firelight behind him cast a long shadow across the yard. "You heard wrong. Ain't much worth stealing here." A rough laugh answered him. "We'll see about that." The next sound came quick, a gun cocking. boots scuffing the mud. Loretta gripped the rifle tighter, her breath steady. Stone's voice came low. "You best ride on, friend. The lady inside's got a mean aim." "She got a mean tongue, too," the man mocked. Loretta stepped forward, lifting the rifle to the window. "Mean enough to say you've overstayed your welcome." The shot came a second later, one warning crack that tore through the night. The bullet struck the dirt inches from a man's boot. The laughter died. Another voice muttered something about bad odds, and then one by one, the riders turned. The sound of their horses faded into the fog. When silence returned, Loretta lowered the rifle. Her hands were trembling now, but she didn't let it show. Stone turned to her, eyes wide in the half-light. "You could have hit him." "I wasn't trying to," she said. He stared for a moment longer, then nodded. "Remind me never to argue with you." She managed a tired smile. That'd be wise. By morning, the tracks were gone, washed clean by dew and wind. Stone fixed the gate, hammered the latch tight, and checked the herd. No losses, no smoke rising on the horizon. When he came back inside, Loretta had breakfast waiting. Biscuits, bacon, and coffee black as tar. He sat down without a word, hands still rough from the cold. She poured his cup. "You think they'll be back?" "Not soon," he said. "They got the message." "Good." She leaned her elbows on the table. "Then maybe we can get back to living." He looked at her for a long while, then reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. "That's all I've been trying to do," he said. Outside, the sun broke through the fog, spilling gold across the valley. The ranch stood quiet again, the kind of quiet you only earn after you've faced down fear and lived to tell about it. But I've been around long enough to know peace on the frontier never holds. It's a fragile thing, made of mornings like that one, soft, simple, pretending the world won't come knocking again. And somewhere beyond those hills, the world was already saddling up. Summer came to Dry Creek wearing a red sky and a quiet kind of mercy. The land baked under the sun, but the fields at Stone's ranch held steady, stubborn and gold. Days stretched long, filled with work that started before dawn and ended when the stars rose. Loretta's bread cooled on the windowsill every evening, and the smell drifted down the valley, sweet and sure as forgiveness. I'd ride past sometimes, watching that cabin glow in the twilight. It didn't look like much from the outside, just logs, nails, and smoke, but I reckon no place west of the Mississippi held more peace. Still, I knew what the desert knows. Peace never stays long enough to be trusted. Stone worked harder than ever, maybe because he didn't know what else to do with the quiet. He rebuilt the barn roof, dug a new well, mended every fence like the world depended on it. Loretta teased him that he was trying to outrun stillness. He said he just wanted things right. She didn't argue, but she saw the truth in him, the way his hands couldn't rest, the way his eyes lingered on the horizon as if expecting something to rise out of it. Some evenings he'd sit on the porch with a book he never opened, listening to her hum in the kitchen. Sometimes he'd tell her stories from the old days of men he rode with, rivers crossed, and nights so cold the stars felt close enough to touch. She'd listen, smiling soft, because she knew every story he told was really a confession, another way of saying, "I'm still here." Then one afternoon, as July burned high, a rider came down the trail. Not a stranger this time. It was Sheriff Kane, me. The dust on my coat carried more than road miles. It carried news I didn't want to bring. Stone met me halfway to the gate. "You look like a man with bad tidings," he said. "Rustlers again," I told him. "The same gang. They hit Harper's ranch last night. Took horses this time. Harper's boy caught a bullet." Stone cursed under his breath. "How many?" "5, maybe 6, head south." He looked past me, out toward the open range. "South runs straight through here." I nodded. "That's why I came." Loretta stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's wrong?" she asked. Stone turned to her. "More thieves. Might pass close." Her face didn't change. "Then we keep watch." I shook my head. "You both ought to stay inside if they come. These men don't talk first." Loretta met my eyes. "Neither do storms, Sheriff, but we've lived through worse." She had a way of saying things that silenced a man's argument before he could make it. That night, Stone and I set a lantern out by the barn and waited. The air was heavy, full of heat and the faint buzz of crickets. Around midnight, we heard them. Hooves on the ridge, a low murmur of voices. Stone drew his rifle, his eyes narrowing. "There," he whispered. The figures came through the moonlight, shadows sliding along the fence line. 5 men, rough and armed. The leader dismounted, walked slow toward the corral. I stepped out first. "Evening, boys," I called him. "You're trespassing." The man froze. "Sheriff Kane," he said, "didn't expect you here." "I could say the same," I answered. "You got no business in Dry Creek." He smirked. "Business goes where the cattle are." Before I could speak again, Stone leveled his rifle. "You'll leave what's mine," he said quietly. The rustler's hand went to his gun. The next second was nothing but noise. Shots cracking through the night. Horses screaming. Dirt flying. I fired once, twice. Saw a man fall. The others scattered, firing wild as they ran. When the smoke cleared, 2 were down, 1 limping away, the rest gone into the dark. My shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed me, but I was still standing. Loretta came running from the house, barefoot, a lantern in her hand. Her face went pale when she saw the blood on my sleeve. "It's nothing," I said. "Just a scratch." Stone was kneeling beside one of the fallen men, checking for breath. "He's done," he said grimly. The other lay groaning, clutching his legs. Loretta knelt beside him, tore a strip from her apron, and bound the wound tight. Stone frowned. "He don't deserve that." She looked up. "Maybe not, but I do." He stared at her, the firelight flickering across his face. Then he nodded once, and that was that. By morning, I took the wounded man into town. Stone buried the dead one behind the ridge, marked the spot with a pile of stones and no name. Out here graves were simple, and forgiveness was earned the same way, quietly. Afterward, the ranch returned to its rhythm, though something had shifted again. Stone seemed older somehow, the weight in his shoulders heavier. Loretta kept her calm, but there was a new light in her eyes, part pride, part sorrow. That evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, she said to him, "You can't hold the world back forever, Stone. It's bigger than fences." He looked at her long before he answered. "Then I'll just build stronger ones." She smiled faintly. "Maybe what needs mending isn't the fence." He didn't reply, but she saw him glance toward the horizon, as if searching for an answer only the land could give. That night, as the stars rose, I thought about them both. about the way the frontier takes and gives, how it shapes people into things harder than stone but still human enough to break. And I wondered how long two hearts like theirs could keep standing against a world that never stayed still. The wind came down from the hills, carrying the smell of rain and dust. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. I'd seen enough to know what that meant. The story wasn't done yet. The West never ends a tale before it tests the truth inside it. The next morning broke with the sound of a hammer on wood. Stone was already at work mending what the fight had torn apart. The fence rails splintered by bullets, the broken latch on the barn door. He moved with the same rhythm he always did, steady and hard, as if work itself could drown out memory. Loretta watched from the porch, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. There was something different in his eyes now. More distance, more quiet. The kind of quiet that hides behind a man's back when he's trying not to feel. By noon, she walked out to him. "You'll wear yourself down before the sun does," she said. He set the hammer aside, sweat tracing through the dust on his brow. "Fence won't fix itself." "Neither will you," she said softly. He looked at her then, jaw tight, eyes shadowed. "You think I'm broken?" "No," she said, "just tired of carrying ghosts that don't belong to you anymore." For a long moment, they stood in the heat, the wind whispering through the dry grass. Then Stone turned back to the fence. "Ghosts don't weigh much," he muttered. Loretta's voice was quiet, almost tender. "Only when you stop pretending, they don't." That night, the air felt strange. The sky was too clear, the stars too sharp. I've seen that kind of calm before, the kind that comes right before something gives way. I rode up near dusk. The horizon was red, the color of iron cooling in a forge. Stone met me by the barn. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I wanted to see for myself," I told him. "Word is the rustlers didn't all scatter. 2 more were seen near the pass." He nodded grimly. "They'll come back." "Maybe," I said, "but you don't have to meet them alone." He didn't answer right away. "It's my land, my fight." "Maybe so," I said, "but she's part of that land now, too." Stone's eyes flicked toward the house, where Loretta's lantern glowed in the window. He didn't say a word, but I knew he understood. When I rode off, the night was already humming with crickets and the faraway howl of coyotes. Inside the cabin, Loretta sat at the table, kneading dough, though her hands weren't really working. They were thinking. Stone came in, dust and silence trailing behind him. "Sheriff says they're near," he said. She looked up. "Then it's time to stop waiting." "What do you mean?" "I mean we can't live in fear of what might come through that gate." He leaned against the wall, watching her. "You talk like someone who's seen more than she says." She smiled faintly. "Everyone's seen more than they say. Some of us just stop talking about it." She dusted her hands and met his eyes. "You built this ranch with your back and your blood. You gave it a heart. But now it's got to have a soul. And that's both of us, Stone." He didn't answer, but his gaze softened, and that was enough. The following day, the wind shifted. You could smell change in it. Gun oil, horse sweat, and the dry taste of something coming undone. Around noon, one of the ranch hands rode in fast, hat low, eyes wide. "They're at the ridge, my," he said. 3 of them, maybe 4. Stone grabbed his rifle. "Get the herd to the north field. Keep the men behind cover." Loretta followed him to the porch. You can't take them alone, she said. He stopped. I've got to keep them from the house. She reached out, caught his hand. You kept the world away long enough. Let me help. He hesitated, torn between instinct and the truth she'd just spoken. Then he nodded. Stay low. If it turns bad. I'll know what to do, she said. The riders came down slow, confident. The leader was the same one from before, the man with the scar on his cheek and hate in his grin. He called out as he neared the gate. Thought we'd finish what we started, McCrae. Stone stepped forward, rifle steady. You finished it when you crossed that line. The man laughed. You talk big for someone standing in the open. Open's where you find the truth, Stone said. The gunfire started like thunder rolling off a cliff. Loud, sudden, merciless. The first shot missed. The second didn't. One of the riders went down hard, his horse bolting into the dust. The other spread out, firing wild toward the house. Loretta ducked behind the porch rail, loading the rifle with quick, practiced hands. When one of the men rode too close, she fired. The bullet struck the ground near his horse's hooves, sending it rearing. The rider fell, cursing as he hit the dirt. Stone took another shot, hitting the last man's arm. Then the silence came back, heavy and sharp. The only sound was the ragged breath of those left alive. The leader crawled to his knees, bleeding, eyes wild. You should have stayed out of it, ma femme. He spat. You don't know who you're fighting. Stone walked closer, rifle still in hand. Doesn't matter. You came here to take what's mine. You lost. The man's glare flickered between them. Stone, steady as iron, and Loretta, standing in the doorway, lantern light behind her like a halo made of fire and flower dust. Damn fools, the man muttered, then slumped into the dirt. When it was over, Loretta walked to Stone, her hands shaking only a little. You're hurt, she said, seeing the blood on his sleeve. He shook his head. Not bad. She pressed her hand over the wound anyway. Then let's keep it that way. He looked down at her fingers, warm against his skin, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself breathe. The sheriff came later to take what was left of the rustlers. The stars were out by then, and the smell of gunpowder still lingered in the grass. As we loaded the bodies, I looked at Stone and Loretta standing together on the porch. The firelight behind them flickered like it was guarding something sacred. You'll have no more trouble, I told them. Stone nodded. I reckon not. Loretta said nothing. She was looking out toward the hills, her face calm, but her eyes carried something deeper, something like forgiveness, though not for them. For the land itself, maybe. For everything it had taken to bring them here. The night fell quiet again, and in that stillness, you could almost believe the frontier had finally given them peace. Almost. For a while, it truly seemed like peace had settled on Dry Creek. The town went back to its old rhythm. Slow mornings, long silences, the kind of life where a man could hear his own thoughts if he stood still enough. The rustlers were gone. The fences stood straight, and the smell of gunpowder had finally drifted away. At Stone's ranch, the days began to run together like water through the same riverbed. Loretta's bread still cooled on the sill every afternoon, and Stone still rode the range from dawn until the heat bent the air above the grass. There were small changes, though, the kind that don't shout but whisper. He laughed more now, not loud, just enough to fill the corners of a room. And she, though she still worked harder than any hired man, carried a softness in her step, as if the earth itself had started to forgive her for all the years it hadn't been kind. I visited sometimes, and each time I found the place a little warmer, the walls brighter, the air thicker with something you could almost call contentment. It's a rare thing, that kind of quiet. The West wasn't built for peace, but there it was. One evening, as the sun melted behind the ridge, Loretta stood outside, hanging laundry. The wind lifted the sheets like sails, and the smell of clean linen drifted through the yard. Stone was mending a bridle nearby, his hat tilted low, eyes following her without meaning to. When she noticed, she smiled. "You're staring," she said. He kept working, but there was a trace of a grin. "Just watching the wind work harder than I do." She laughed softly. "Maybe it's trying to keep up my—" That sound, her laughter, filled the space between them better than any words. I reckon a man could live a long life on just that sound. But life in the West has a way of turning gentle moments into warnings. That night, a letter arrived. It came folded neat, out of the kind of paper that had traveled far. The handwriting was careful, old-fashioned. Stone read it at the table, the lamplight trembling over his face. Loretta watched him from across the room, sensing the shift before he spoke. "Who's it from?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "My brother." She didn't know he had one. "What does he want?" Stone folded the letter once more. "He's sick. Wants to see me before the end." The words hung heavy. Outside, a coyote cried, sharp and distant. "When will you go?" she asked. "Tomorrow." She nodded, though her hands clenched in her lap. "Then I'll pack you food for the road." He looked at her, that quiet storm in his eyes again. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I will." The next morning, the air was cool, touched by the scent of rain that hadn't come yet. Stone saddled his horse, while Loretta wrapped loaves of bread and jerky in cloth. She handed him the bundle, her fingers brushing his. "Don't stay gone too long," she said. He met her gaze, and for a moment the world seemed to hold still. "I won't," he said, though both of them knew the West doesn't always let a man keep his word. He rode out with the sunrise, his figure growing smaller against the gold horizon until he vanished into the light. Days passed, then a week. The ranch ran quieter without him, but not empty. Loretta kept everything running, feeding stock, mending harnesses, watching the skies. The hands respected her. They'd seen her brave storms and gunfire. Still, when the wind blew across the valley at night, she found herself standing at the porch, staring toward the hills, listening for hoofbeats that never came. Then, one late afternoon, I rode in from town. She met me at the gate, dust on her skirt and a question in her eyes before I even spoke. "You've heard," she said. I nodded. "He's alive. His brother passed a few days ago. Stone stayed to bury him." Her shoulders sagged a little, not from weakness, but from release. "Then he'll be home soon." "Yes," I said, "soon." But I'd seen something in Stone's face before I left him, something unsettled. The past has a way of cutting fresh even when you think it's long dead. That night, as the moon rose full and pale, Loretta sat by the fire, sewing by the flicker of light. She hummed the same song she always did, the one I'd heard her hum that first winter. Only this time it sounded different, lower, slower, like a prayer sent to someone just out of reach. I watched her from the doorway, and I realized something. She wasn't waiting out of fear. She was waiting out of faith, the kind you can't teach, the kind that only comes from having lost everything once and finding it again by pure grace. By dawn, clouds were rolling in from the west. The first thunder shook the hills, and the air smelled like the kind of rain that would wash the world clean. That's when she heard it, the sound she'd been listening for every night since he left. A horse on the ridge, one rider. She stepped onto the porch, heart in her throat. The wind whipped her hair loose, the storm gathering behind her. The rider came closer, slow and certain. When Stone dismounted, his face was darker, lined by grief, but gentler somehow, like a man who'd walked through fire and come back carrying light instead of ashes. He looked up at her, rain already falling in streaks across his hat brim. "I kept my promise," he said. She smiled, tears lost in the rain. "I knew you would." He climbed the steps, water dripping from his coat, and she took his hand without a word. Behind them, the thunder rolled over the plains, and the world began again. I've seen a lot of reunions in my time, some fierce, some foolish, but none as quiet or as true as that one. They didn't need to say much. Out here, words are only as good as the hands that hold them. And theirs, though scarred and tired, were steady. When autumn came, the plains turned the color of old brass, and the air carried the scent of hay and cooling earth. The land breathed differently then, slower, wiser, like a man who'd finally learned what silence was for. At Stone's ranch, the rhythm held. Mornings began with coffee and the soft creak of porch boards. Evenings ended with the low hum of crickets and the steady crackle of the stove. It was peace, but the kind that had been earned through fire. Stone was quieter now, not from distance, but from thought. Since his brother's death, he'd carried a look in his eyes I recognized, the gaze of a man who's seen the end once and knows how close it can come. Loretta never asked what passed between them. She simply let him talk when he wanted to, and sit when he didn't. One evening, after supper, I rode out there to share coffee and a smoke. The moon was half full, hanging low over the cottonwoods. Loretta had already gone to bed, and the cabin light burned soft through the curtain. Stone and I sat in the yard, the smell of dust and wood smoke between us. "She keeps this place alive," he said after a while. "She keeps you alive," I told him. He nodded, slow, eyes on the stars. "I reckon that's true." We sat a while longer before he said, "My brother left me his land, 200 acres east of the ridge. He wanted me to have it, but I don't know what for. I barely kept this one standing." "You'll figure it," I said. He shook his head. "Maybe it's not about land anymore. Maybe it's about what you plant in it." That was Stone for you. The man could speak 10 words and leave you thinking for days. Later, as I rode off, I looked back once. The lantern light flickered through the cabin window, and I saw him standing there, watching her sleep. Not guarding her, just watching, as if trying to believe peace was something a man could actually hold. Days turned into weeks, and the harvest came in clean. Loretta's kitchen filled with jars of preserves, and the cellar smelled of apples and smoke. The ranch hands teased that she'd feed half the county come winter. She only smiled and said, "Then let them come hungry." One afternoon, as she was hanging laundry by the barn, a wagon creaked up the trail. It wasn't the sheriff this time. It was a woman, small and pale, wrapped in a black shawl. Her hair was gray, her face drawn like parchment. She stepped down slow, her boots raising dust that shimmered in the sun. Loretta met her halfway. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The woman nodded, eyes searching the horizon. "I'm looking for McCrae." "He's out in the field," Loretta said. "Nah, you can." The woman's lips trembled. "His mother." Loretta blinked, surprised. She'd never heard Stone mention her. "He'll be glad to see you." "I don't know about glad," the old woman said, "but he'll see me." When Stone came in from the pasture, he stopped dead at the sight of her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he took off his hat and walked closer. "Ma." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "You look like your father did when he left." "I'm not him," Stone said quietly. "No," she whispered, "you're better." Loretta stood aside, letting them have the space between words. The years in that silence were thick, hard years, the kind that make or break a soul. Later, when the sun went down, they sat around the table. The old woman spoke of her small farm back east, of a winter too harsh, and a son she hadn't seen in 20 years. "You never wrote," she said softly. "I didn't know what to say," Stone answered. "You could have said you were alive." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't feel like it." The room fell still. Loretta reached for his arm, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "You're alive now," she said. His mother's gaze turned to her. "You're the one he wrote about then, the one who saved him." Loretta flushed. "I just lit a fire and made some bread." The old woman smiled, lines deepening around her eyes. "Sometimes that's all it takes to save a man." For the first time that night, Stone laughed, quietly, but true. It sounded like a door opening. The next day, his mother helped Loretta in the kitchen. 2 generations of women bound by silence and kindness. They cooked stew, baked biscuits, and filled the house with a kind of warmth that can't be bought or built. Stone worked outside, his hammer ringing steady against the air, and every so often he'd glance toward the window, just to make sure they were still there. When evening came, they ate together. The old woman said grace, her voice trembling at the end. "For home," she whispered, "and for those who found it late but found it still." That night, the stars were bright enough to see the path to heaven. The air was cool, carrying the smell of pine and bread. I stood outside a while, listening to the faint hum of their voices from inside. And I remember thinking, if there's such a thing as redemption, that's what it sounds like. The next morning, Stone's mother left with a hug and a promise to return before spring. As her wagon rolled down the trail, Loretta watched until the dust settled. Stone came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You never told me about her," she said. He nodded. "Didn't think I deserved to. And now I reckon I do." They stood together in the sunlight, the world around them quiet and full. The wind rustled the grass, the horses grazed by the fence, and for the first time since I'd known them, neither one looked ready to run. But the West has a habit of waiting until you believe in peace before it reminds you what it costs to keep it. The first frost came early that year, silvering the fields before dawn. The mornings turned sharp and quiet, the kind of cold that makes every breath feel earned. The ranch slowed its pace. Even the horses moved softer, their breath hanging in the air like ghosts reluctant to leave. Loretta woke earlier now, lighting the stove before the sky had even begun to pale. She hummed while she worked, the same low tune she always did, a song I never knew the words to, but one I could feel. Stone would come in from the yard with frost on his hat brim, and together they'd drink coffee in the glow of the fire, saying little but meaning plenty. Winter out here isn't cruel because it's cold. It's cruel because it gives you time to think. One evening, as snow began to drift across the hills, Stone sat by the window with a ledger open on his lap. Loretta sat nearby darning socks, the soft rhythm of her needle filling the silence. "You ever wonder," he said after a while, "why the good things always come after the bad?" She looked up. "Maybe it's the only way we recognize 'em." He smiled, but it didn't last long. "Kane says the rustler's old trail's gone quiet, says the valley's finally at peace." "Do you believe that?" He shook his head. "Peace ain't something you find. It's something you make, and you gotta keep making it." The fire popped, a spark leaping out onto the hearth. She reached over, pressed it back with the poker, and said, "Then let's keep making it." I was there the day the snow came heavy, when the sky disappeared behind a curtain of white. The world turned soundless, just wind and memory. I rode up to check on him, as I did every few weeks, and found the cabin half buried but warm, smoke curling from the chimney. Loretta met me at the door, cheeks flushed from the fire. "Come in, Sheriff. There's stew on the stove." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sage and meat. Stone was carving wood at the table, his hands steady, his eyes bright in the firelight. He'd carved a small figure, two riders side by side, their horses frozen mid-step. "Figured I'd keep them close," he said when he saw me looking. Loretta smiled from the stove. "He says he's no artist, but I've yet to see him make something that didn't hold." I sat with them that night, the snow piling high against the window, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the world pressing down on me. There was a stillness in that room I'll never forget, the kind that comes when a man and a woman stop running from what life gave them and decide to stay put. Later, after supper, Stone leaned back in his chair. "You think the land ever gets tired of forgiving us?" he asked. Loretta turned from the window. "The land doesn't forgive," she said. "It just keeps waiting until we do." Outside, the wind eased, and for a heartbeat, everything was still. Then she crossed the room, laid her hand on his shoulder, and said softly, "You waited long enough." He reached up, covered her hand with his. No words followed. None were needed. I remember the sound of the fire that night, the way it cracked and sighed like a living thing. I remember the glow of lamplight on their faces and the way time seemed to bend around them, two souls bound by storms, rebuilt by quiet. Years have passed since then. The town of Dry Creek still stands, though smaller now, quieter. The saloon's gone. Odessa left years back, chasing something she never found. Stone's ranch still stretches over the valley. The fence is silvered with age but strong. Loretta's garden grows wild now. Herbs and flowers tangle together like they forgot where one ended and the other began. Folks say you can still smell her bread when the wind comes from the west. Maybe that's just memory, but I like to think it's real. Stone, well, he's older now. Slower, too. His hair's gone to ash. His hands rougher than ever. But when he walks the land at dusk, you can see it. The quiet pride in his step, the peace that finally decided to stay every year when the first snow falls. He lights the lanterns on the porch, 2 of them, and lets them burn through the night. Some say it's habit. Others say it's tribute. Me, I know better. Those lights aren't for remembrance. They're a promise, a reminder that even in a place built from dust and blood, kindness can outlast the storm. I still ride past sometimes, old as the hills and twice as stubborn. I see that cabin, smoke curling steady against the cold sky, and I think about what the West tried to teach all of us, how love, in its truest form, doesn't shout or shine. It endures. And when the wind comes low across the plains, I swear I can hear her voice again, soft as prayer. Don't be afraid of the quiet, Sheriff. That's where life begins. Maybe she was right, because out there, under the endless sky, between the sound of the wind and the beating of your own heart, the West still whispers the same truth it always did. That the strongest things aren't made of iron or fire. They're made of forgiveness, and they never die.